live. Okay, for people joining this live stream, this is a language completeness and consistency meeting about Wolfram language. And our first item, we have assorted items. Our first item is about storing search index objects in local objects. Okay, so search index objects can get quite big, and where are they being stored right now?
In user-based directory.
Which is what type of thing usually? What's the name of the user-based directory? Is it $user-based directory?
Yes.
Okay. What is that? That's some weird, what other crud is there right now?
Well, it's everything that's been there, since 1996 or whenever we introduced user-based directory, right? Your password, your kernel in it, your front end in it. There's also your Wolfram Alpha cache.
Wolfram Alpha cache?
Yeah.
The entity value.
And then entity value.
Okay.
All the packlets,
Right. So $.
So wait a minute. So what you're saying is there's both things that could be blown away, like all the caching stuff and all the packlets, and there's things that better not be blown away, like the init files. Is that correct?
And I mean, whether the packlets can be blown away, right, that's a bit of a matter of perspective, right?
Well, they can be regenerated. They exist on a server. Your init files are custom to you.
Right.
Yeah, but the search index is more like something that is cached, right? So nowadays it should go into the $cache-based directory or whatever it's
Nicholas
called.
seemed to disagree that it's the cache, so maybe he should speak to that point.
Sorry, who was disagreeing?
Nicholas, I believe,
Okay.
in the email thread, and he's here, so he should speak for himself.
Hi, yes, I think that indices are more like databases that you can create manually. You insert data, you have fields, you have columns, and you modify, and at some point you delete them. Creating them is an expensive operation, and everything is manual.
Right,
and if you did, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think one thing that we need to be clear about is that we're not talking about like the documentation search guys, which are sort of auto-generated for you, right? These are things, we're talking exclusively about the things you create when you call create search index. Is that correct?
Yes. I think that if we had a system of automatically creating indices, like opportunistically, I don't know if that's the word, that if you search for something in some path, then you automatically create an index so that the next time things are faster, that would be a cache. Yes, I agree with that. But as implemented now, it's something you say, okay, I want to search on these things, and I create an index. So I don't see that as you can name the indices you create. So it's a collection of things you own and you want to manage.
So only the anonymous ones are in user-based directory, or are all of them in user-based
All of
directory?
them.
But you can give them specific names, is what you're saying.
Yes, if you don't give a name, you automatically get a UUID as a name. But you can call the indices as you want, like, my dogs.
Okay, so give me a sense of what's in local objects and what's in the user-based directory. What's the distinction? How would we define the distinction?
I understand local object is more like a mechanism. It's not just a place to do arbitrary file operations, right?
Right. I mean, I think local objects are like cloud objects. They're things we've provided the specific interface for, working with, and they tend.
And they intend to stick around.
Sure.
But also they're intended to be used by using the local objects interface. This is why I asked if the suggestion was to re-implement the Java library to use local object, is because I didn't think that local object was a way to create a directory that you can then do anything with, which is what the Lucene library needs. what the idea behind local object is you use local object manipulation functions to manipulate your local objects.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you don't need the local objects overhead and facilities, then just use plain files or directory.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm beginning.
So it's $local base directory, which is the one to compare this to, which is where the local objects go by default. But I mean, they can go anywhere, and in particular, there's a good use case for local objects in the cache directory for cache-based stuff. But I mean, if you don't need the overhead of local objects, then just use plain files or directory.
Hey, does this work if I say all in the first argument of
It should.
Okay. And so what's the one for local object base directory? Is that right? Local base.
Well, $local base is not a file; it's a URL. So you need,
I see.
So you need to do file. What is it? File name expand. Is it that converts it to?
Okay. It's going to get complicated. Okay. All right. Look, I think this proposal has just died.
Okay.
I mean, does anybody want to dispute that? We can go on having search index objects in user base directory, I guess. Anybody disagree?
No, I think that's right. And just, I mean, Roman, you might have stuck around anyway, but I think it would be useful if you stuck around for the confirm quiet discussion.
Certainly.
And for module scope.
Okay.
Okay. The test returned by confirm assert is always false.
Right. So it has a property called test. When confirm assert fires, it creates a failure object, and that has a property called test. But in that output, I would have expected to see 2 greater than 3 or some hold of 2 greater than 3 or something like that, not false. And
oh yeah, go ahead.
And the same thing and basically I think my next complaint is also about the message. It just says assertion failed, where I might have expected to see assertion 2 greater than 3 failed. And so I guess Christopher, you have a reply, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean the first thing is just a technical thing. So it doesn't actually always return false, because if it's neither true or false, then it might return something else, because it uses true Q to determine whether it triggers. So the reason for all of this is because it's not hold first. So I mean, it could be hold first, and then it would be able to report things like here was the assertion, but right now it isn't. And so all it sees is true, false, or some third value. So I mean, right? I guess it could be made hold first, but it does seem like it would be it's a purely aesthetic thing to do,
and might cause other problems.
Right, but on the other hand, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's purely aesthetic. I mean, if I put in an assertion, right, and certainly in a C assertion, right, I see what assertion fired, so I don't necessarily need to go to line 936 of file.mc. I can just see which assertion filed. So in this case, if I have an assertion failure, I don't know what was the assertion. Well, maybe. Oh, so you're saying?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So, well, yeah. So most expressions, a lot of expressions are going to evaluate to either true or false, right? So
that are in confirm assert. Yeah, I wouldn't have been. Right. I would have been nervous to use something that doesn't have a definite truth value in confirm assert.
Well, it uses true Q. So if it returns, 15, it will take that to mean false.
False.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But, suppose, right. I mean, obviously 2 greater than 3 is stupid, right? But if I put in, input is less than 0 and greater than 255, it would be useful to see that unevaluated expression rather than just false.
Depending on how big it gets.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that the only Right now, the only way to get behavior like that would be to use one of its, I think it's second argument, where you can put, you can put sort of arbitrary information there, and you could just put something like where the assert was as like a human readable string, but that's very manual. So
I see.
you'd really prefer not to do that.
Here's a question I didn't think to try because I didn't realize it wasn't hold first. What if you use unevaluated? Will it, handle that correctly?
What do you mean? If you have unevaluated of 2 greater than 3?
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't know what unevaluated will turn into.
I think it will just evaluate because it's not a hold first function.
Yeah.
No. Well, right. The whole point of unevaluated is that it temporarily makes the thing hold all.
Until the next thing that evaluates it.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, you'd need to write the body of the function correctly to avoid any evaluation leaks. But in principle, that's maybe something we could.
Yeah, but then you never know whether it's true or false, right?
No. You right.
It still evaluates because the code inside confirm evaluates. So I just checked, confirm assert unevaluated print 3 semicolon 2 bigger than 3. And it printed 3 exactly once, which is nice, and gave me an assertion failed.
Right. I'm just suggesting, I mean, one thing we could do is, we could have a whole, I mean, if the first line of the body is, held test equals hold of input, then unevaluated there would allow that 2 greater than 3 to make it into the held expression. And maybe that's something we...
What problem are we trying to solve here? I mean, the fact that we'd like to have better tagging. I mean, the truth is, I hate to say this, but since the whole confirm and close mechanism has lexical behavior, it could actually, this may be too horrifying to even suggest, it could actually custom write its message lexically. Is that completely crazy, Christopher?
What do you mean? You mean it says something like from cell blank or from line blank?
Well, it could literally pick up this expression as it goes through in its lexical process of putting in tags. It could pick up that unevaluated expression and put it in, hold wrappers or whatever else it needs to do, so that.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, but there's weird stuff about, like if you have a with outside of the enclose, or for example, if you have like the thing that's inside of the assert might not be, like the thing that's most literally lexically inside might not be very human intelligible. I mean, so another, so right now, just to show how it would work right now, if you wanted to tag it manually, you can just say enclose of confirm assert 2 greater than 3, and then as the second argument to confirm assert, just say, foo as a string, right? And get rid of the extract and so on though. Just just return the failure object. Right now, if you press the plus, I believe you'll see foo, right, as the information. So that's the closest that there is right now to letting you know which assert failed.
Right, and I suppose we don't want to stick the information in the message because it might be very long.
Well, maybe we should actually. I mean, so in general, so okay, here's maybe the only reason not to. So right now, the information field, which maybe not the best name because it actually has like 2 purposes. So one purpose is exactly this. It's so that you can tag your failure objects, or so you can include any, extra stuff about the failure that you might want to use later. But it's also nice because that information field, or that argument is, okay, actually, I'm realizing there was something incorrect from earlier, but yeah, that argument is actually held. So this function, I just remembered, confirm assert is actually hold all, but it evaluates all of its arguments immediately except for the information argument, because it doesn't evaluate the information argument until it's actually failed. So that way you can put stuff in there like a message, if you want to throw a message when it
it isn't the best name. Information isn't the best name. It's kind of like action or something, but that's the wrong name as well.
Right, but I mean that does mean technically it is hold all. So you could without changing its attributes get some sort of held version of the input expression.
So the default second argument could be hold of first argument.
Yes, fed in lexically.
Or the I mean it comes with a thing, this test parameter. I mean I guess it could have another. I mean every confirm, the failure objects for each different confirm has different fields. So we could add a field here for confirm assert. That's basically the assertion. I don't know what to call it, the assertion. Yeah.
Right. And if we stuck the assertion into the message, I think that would be super useful.
Right. So, okay. So then that will be a lexical thing that happens, that it writes the second argument or whatever it is. Or maybe it isn't the second argument. I don't know where it would store it. But
it's not in the second argument. It's just there's a whole association inside that failure object, and it builds that when the assertion fails. And you can put whatever the heck you want in it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that would be nice then. If a lexical, lexical preparation time, whatever it's called, it tries to do this. And if the thing that's there is something, if it's a with, well, sorry, that's the best we can do.
Right. I mean, it's simpler than the lexical preparation time thing, though, because it's just right. It's just when it evaluates. It's a hold all function.
Right. It just needs to be right. It just needs to store, since it's an unevaluated function, it just needs to remember to store the unevaluated input.
Well, wait a minute. Then it has to be a hold first function to do this.
But it's already hold all. That's yeah. Christopher was mistaken when he said that.
Oh, okay, fine. Then it's easy. Yes, then I agree. Then that seems like the path forward.
Yep.
Okay.
And there's a bug number there, Christopher. I mean, I assigned it to you, so can, you can follow up.
Yep.
Okay. Confirm quiet.
So for this one, actually, I was working on this a bit earlier today, and I actually found a way, I think, to get around most of these problems. So I mean, I think I don't know who brought this up, but this has been sort of a long going issue, because basically messages are sort of complicated in detecting, if you're inside of a quiet, or if there's a quiet inside of you, and so on, and it's sort of a mess. But there's this thing called so right now the behavior of confirmed quiet is kind of weird in that it detects if you have like, for example, if I say confirm quiet of 0 to the 0, then the confirm quiet will trigger. So it ignores the quiet that's inside of it, which is unlike check, for example. And as was brought up, this can lead to all sorts of weird issues.
You need an exclosure around it, Stephen, but you'll see a failure object as opposed to the expected indeterminate, because you quieted that message, so it shouldn't have.
Oh, I see. So confirm quiet. The thing about confirm quiet is, boy, it's not obvious what you want it to do, because it could be the case that for cosmetic reasons you quieted a message, but you still want to know that a message was generated.
Well, but confirm quiet already quiets the message.
Right, but then you put the quiet outside of the confirm quiet rather than inside of it.
Right.
Which doesn't work, because confirm quiet quiets the message. So
does it?
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's true.
You request, but yeah, by default, that's everything. But so the only other thing though is, so just to update on this though. So there's this thing called internal quiet status, which I think I went back in the old email thread about this, and it was discussed back then. And I found actually there's some general utilities stuff for using quiet status to try and detect whether or not a message has been quieted. And so I just was trying that earlier today, and it looks like it works. So that may be sort of a solution. So the behavior, if you use this, or like this other version I just wrote, is if you have a quiet outside of the confirmed quiet, that does not affect it. It'll just do everything it does normally. If you have a quiet inside of the confirmed quiet, then the confirmed quiet doesn't see the messages, which I think is pretty much the behavior of check, and it's probably the right thing to do.
Okay, yeah, so I think I certainly agree with this, and I think most other people would agree with the proposal that confirm quiet should behave like check. The second issue, and is sort of, you'll have to bear with me and read it. So
which issue is this one here?
Yes, right. So, check is oblivious to general stop because it doesn't actually, right? It doesn't do anything about quieting messages, right? So one general stop will fire, messages after general stop are still technically firing. They're just not, printing anything. So you see, we see 3, 1 of, power infees, then a general stop, and then we still get $failed because, the message fired. We just didn't see any text from it in the output. Now, there's a slight disagreement about sort of confirm quiet. So if you do confirm quiet prevents the message from ever being issued, which means general stop never triggered. And so you just get 5 failure objects and you never see any messages and nothing about general stop. I think this is okay. Jeremy, I think, I'll let him speak for himself, I think disagrees with this behavior because he thinks it contradicts the note that says confirm quiet stops evaluation when the first matching message is generated.
Well, actually, so first of all, I've been working with a function like this in the alpha code and fixing all the bugs that keep popping up in it because it turns out that this function is unimplementable. So that's my first warning, is confirm quiet is unimplementable without ever having bugs.
But wait. But you haven't used confirm quiet itself. You've been using your bootleg version of confirm quiet.
Well, no, but
sure.
this is something that came up this is back when we were first talking about this, like in the summer or something, that basically there are some weird things with messages that are actually kind of, the correct behavior is kind of incoherent.
Yep.
And so you can just get close to it, but you cannot perfectly do it.
And how does this relate to the things I was discussing before about echo and the possibility of being able to have a stop for echoes?
Wasn't this discussed in that meeting? There was some time we were talking about having these fancy echo functions, and there was going to be some outer function that would sort of
there is a quiet
like make an echo pane or something.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. That's a good idea.
I think it's a slightly different issue because, I mean, at least at the present time, just because messages, right? You have on messages and off messages, and you have quiet messages, and you have these various hooks that fire in different ways depending on all this status. Right.
So what's the issue here? So the issue,
there might not be an issue here with general stop if confirm quiet is actually quieting the message in addition to terminating evaluation. But with the function that I'm used to, though, you still want to see the message. It's just that you want it to halt the evaluation.
Is there a way to see the message with confirm quiet or not?
And that's sort of my third point. So suppose we want to stop evaluation after the first message, but we still want to see the message, which I guess is something that Jeremy wants, and it's also something that's been requested by users over the years. So here I have something that sort of does it, but it has a couple of issues. One is the second argument, which is highlighted in yellow, is just pretty darn complicated.
That's
and the second is that it's
God, wouldn't you like to have a splice that will work in more generality?
I don't really use splice, so
I know, but you shouldn't use sequence at, which is a much worse thing than splice. And whatever happened to the discussion of splice having a second argument which gives its head? Anyway, never mind, but we'll come back to that. That's a separate ILD discussion.
I know. I think apply is a perfectly nice function. So
okay. Anyway, keep going. So this is grotesque. We all agree.
This is grotesque, and the other thing is, rather than giving, I've tried to reproduce the message, but you'll notice that it's actually, rather than giving me 1/0, which is the thing which actually generated the message, it's giving me the whole first argument to quiet, and so. The question is, can we do better? And maybe this is just something Christopher needs to go think about. But
and the third problem with what you put there is when I open up the debugger because I want to see where my message fired. I'm going to see that it fired after the confirm quiet and therefore after the actual 1/0 attempted to evaluate instead of at the evaluation of 1/0.
Oh, that is a good point. I didn't think of about that.
So, I mean, it's very simple for, I mean, confirm quiet right now, you know, it's just, it explicitly quiets the messages that you're detecting, because I think that is probably the most common case, is you just want to handle the message more gracefully than printing messages everywhere. But I mean, it's trivial, of course, for it to not quiet them. The only question is how it would do that. So, I mean, for example, you could imagine an option, but the problem is that the next argument, what is it? I think the third argument for confirm quiet is that the argument currently called information, which can be any expression. And so it can be a rule. And so, you know, if you wanted to have an option, you'd have to do sort of annoying stuff with the information.
Well, I
parameter.
mean, that's what check arguments or arguments options is for, right? If you set the option, if you use the parameter rules mode goes, or options mode goes to shortest, then it will only treat it as an option if it's a known option name to the head. And so I would encourage you to look at those two new in 12 functions, because I think they will automate the processing that, I agree, without it is very annoying, which is why I spent so much time on writing those functions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very familiar with, I haven't used check arguments and so on much yet, but I mean, there is a, you know, of course there is a sort of genuine ambiguity that right now you can have anything in the information field, and maybe this means you can't have a rule that looks a certain way.
Where does it say that this doesn't, that this suppresses the message?
I don't think it does anywhere.
It might in the details. It might not, in which case that's a bug, but.
Yeah, I mean, it talks about does not generate. I think it should say even here.
Enforces?
Well, confirms that no messages would be generated, or I see.
It could say otherwise quieting them and throwing an error, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, that's reasonable. Yes, that's reasonable. Yeah, it should say that. And the reason, basically the reason to quiet them by default here, which I think is the right decision, is that you just put this in code and it's just like, if something went wrong, I want to exit here. You don't want the user to see, you know, from deep in some stack of functions, some weird message about something they don't understand. So I think that's fine. But now the question is how to unquiet.
Right. And I
think it also,
I mean,
go ahead.
My personal opinion is an option is the right thing. And if, right, it wouldn't mean you can't have rules in general in that argument. It just means you couldn't have a rule whose left-hand side is that one option name, which I think
what will be the option name?
Sure.
Like reissue message, issue message maybe, or
maybe
the other possibility would be,
something.
Look, here's another possibility to mess with the second argument here. By the way, what do we have? What possible named message groups are there?
I think that's in $message groups. Yeah, and it hasn't been updated for a while, so you know we probably
they're embarrassingly bad. Okay, so to me, if you could do something with that second argument, that would be a much cleaner way to deal with it, because the most common case is, you know, in other words, let's say that the second argument, let's say that here, I mean, just kind of thinking if you could say all or something, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the right term is here.
I think you can say all. I mean, so that argument is, you know, painstakingly recreates the behavior of quiet,
which certainly accepts all.
Yes.
Fine, but then then maybe what it should be is something like, let's say that it was expression. Let's imagine, and maybe this is bad, maybe this is wrong, maybe this is too weird.
Yeah, I was thinking more of an ordered pair. So it would be list all true, and
but that's not going to work at all because of the fact that you can put the messages in a list.
But in
well,
general,
I would. Well, I mean, I agree. This is not perfectly clean, but my inclination would be all true is just a special case, and otherwise you'd need a list of ordered pairs if you wanted to. Right, the default of a flat list would be all off, and.
Well, but then it's very different from quiet, which is kind of annoying.
What's very different from quiet?
Well, like the point is, so right now, if I have a quiet that says something like, quiet of some expression, comma, and then it gives a list of 5 different messages it wants to quiet, that will just work inside of confirmed quiet. But if you had to, for example, annotate every one of those messages with a true or false, then it would look very different from the argument you feed to quiet. And I think that if we did support, if there was some sort of annotation you could give that second argument, I think that annotation should be like on the outside. It shouldn't change the.
No, I understand. Is there an obvious annotation? Go ahead, Roman.
Yeah, my point is that if you use that mechanism of enclose of confirm quiet, it's kind of up to you to decide whether you want to issue a message or not. And issuing the original message is probably rarely the thing to do. So that
do you mean like not quiet?
You would generate a new message inside enclose.
I mean that is an approach, but I don't think that's the approach everybody wants.
I think the approach of you see the message, but nevertheless it exits with an exception is a reasonable approach, which is the other case we're talking about here, right?
Right.
I mean, I could imagine a special second argument that just generates the message, like, for example, inherited or some such other thing, or, something weird, full, inherited, whatever, there, that just deals with the case where it says, oh, God, that doesn't work, does it?
It always annoys me when there are these arguments where there's all and there's full and there's, and these are different. And then there are these like subtle differences between the 5 different, yeah.
Well, we need 5 new synonyms for automatic.
Exactly.
Right. So hold on. Maybe the right way to do it is to annotate it by having the current payload there and having some reason why we have blah arrow current payload.
I'm not sure what you mean by payload here.
Well, I mean this thing here, for example. I mean, I think the case where you want to say,
right. Well, yeah. So we could have it like be either a list of rules over an association where with like reissued goes to payload and. Right. So if you want all of the right. So if you only want to reprint certain messages, you say, issued or issue or whatever word we come up with goes to, or unquiet goes to payload, quiet goes to payload.
Issued and unissued, or displayed and non-displayed.
Right.
And those are both payloads. And then the question is what the elided form. So that's the very, very elaborate form. Actually, that's quite nice. I quite like that, to put the issued messages and the unissued messages.
Right. And then the elided form could just be issued goes to all. I mean, I think that's a perfectly understandable and compact.
Yes, I agree.
So if a message is reissued, will it be captured by an auto confirm quiet?
Christopher, that's for you, I think.
I mean, yes, I think it would be.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
and you'd want to wrap your yeah, right. Unless there's an intervening quiet, right?
Right.
Okay. I mean, this probably needs a little bit more detail, but I think this is the right direction. What name?
But when would you ever want to have or like, okay, what's a situation where you want it so that it always triggers, so that the confirmed quiet, triggers on all this whole class of messages, but it only prints the message for some of them. Right, like, so what's the advantage of having something like this over just something that somehow indicates just true or false, do you issue all messages or none of them?
It's a hack for dealing with the fact that we want the syntactic form of issued arrow payload.
Yeah, I mean, I so I don't know that there's any place where I would really want it, but I can certainly conceive of a situation where, there are certain specific messages I want to issue, and anything else is like, an unknown error occurred. And so then those I want silent, and I handle them differently by saying an unknown error occurred at the end.
I see. Yeah.
Is that a common, is that a super robust or common approach? Probably not, but I'm sure there are people out there who write code like that, and I'm not so offended by it that I think we...
Well, yeah, it's like the thing you don't want is that the message says unknown error, right? Which is just like, whoever wrote that piece of software is crazy. Well, this would be my so far from the things we've discussed, that seems to be my preference, is to do something like this. Christopher, does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I still think maybe an option would be, well, I don't know. I'm not particularly happy with any of them, but I guess this is probably the best of them.
I mean, why don't we do this? Why don't you play with argument options a bit and see how you see how you feel after you've, because I think with just 15 minutes of work with arguments options, you could implement this and then test it and see how it feels and report back to us.
Right. I mean, none of these are particularly hard to implement, right? But right. Yeah. So I guess then the question is, what would the option be called?
Wait, why is there an option? There's no option here.
No. But in the other version where it would have an option, that's something like quiet messages, true or false.
No, display quiet messages or something. Display messages, arrow true or false.
Well, it won't necessarily display them because there could be a quiet outside of it.
Oh, for goodness sake.
It's just the question of whether or not it will quiet the messages.
I mean, if we really want to be, verbose about it, it's reissue first message.
Why is that first message? Oh, I see.
Because it stops.
Oh, gosh.
Right, that's a good point.
I think this requires more thought. I mean, I would suggest that Christopher thinks about this case and the possible, I prefer this case. I think nobody's ever going to use an option here. I think they're just going to write their code differently. Whereas here, I can imagine somebody just flipping, putting in issued arrow inside a piece of otherwise, reasonable
right,
code.
And the default presumably will be non-issued.
Correct.
Right. Non-issued goes to all.
Right.
Right. It's the effective default. Question: in the message group business, are we ever going to do anything with that? Is that whoever maintains Wolfram language data? That's probably, or I don't know who maintains the message documentation.
There isn't a whole lot of message documentation.
Yeah, I guess
there was. I mean, Dave Witoff wrote a whole big giant messages book at some point.
You mean the pages for specific messages?
Yes.
Well, so the situation is, Oliver and I, who are probably the two people who write the most message pages, complain about how hard it is to do in DocuTools, and Brian V is like, well, you guys are the only ones, this tab isn't used very much, so we don't spend much time maintaining it. And so the short answer is there's nobody overall in charge, and those of us who try to update those find it difficult because the tooling is not super robust. Although maybe he's given it a little bit of love, but it's still not super easy.
Well, I mean, that whole tooling for special case pages should get a lot better as they become form notebooks. But my question is, look, this really is pretty lame. And I think this is useful because, I mean, I think confirm quiet is a good way to catch. I mean, the thing I've been pushing for ages is these messages that are off by default.
Is there a known performance hit of having messages that are off by default?
I don't know. There shouldn't be. If there is, it's bad.
My guess is that there is some. I mean, like, for example, if you had a message that was off by default, that was, every time you did addition, then I think that would kill you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing we need to look at. I still think, I mean, this whole mechanism is still fairly young of, the confirm and close mechanism. I think it's probably starting to get more widely used. But I still think this will be very useful. But maybe it's undoable. I mean, maybe it's just, it's like the question of verbosity levels.
Right. And I mean, the other question is, first of all, what's a use case where you're actually going to pick a message group? And two, what message groups would there be? Because it seems to me like most of the cases are, there's either a specific message, there's one thing that can go wrong that you want to catch, like 1/0, or you just want to catch everything, and you're.
No, I'll tell you the ones that look, the class that I would think are the things somehow stayed symbolic and shouldn't have done.
Okay, so basically, I mean, right, and there's a whole massive class of messages that go with that.
Yes.
I mean, it's like it's right.
I mean, look.
Also, I might want to just quiet all messages from Gaussian matrix. And there's no, and I don't know off the top of my head what all those messages could be. And so I want to do Gaussian matrix : star, but that's not a valid syntax.
Right, and you can't do a message name of Gaussian matrix, blank or something like that either. So
right. I mean, that's something where, I mean, I think it might be good to maybe support some stuff like that, both in this and in quiet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's certainly something that has been requested.
Look, the main point is, what are the scenarios, and we're not going to get this in this meeting, we should have a separate discussion at some other time. The scenarios, message cascade scenarios. One is something stayed symbolic and shouldn't have done. That generates a message cascade. Okay, one question that relates to this next item is, if we were a typed language all the way down, certain things would error out that do not for us.
But hey, that's not. It's not the message cascade. It's the crappy evaluation cascade that's happening. That's causing the message. So
right, I was going to say. So if you use
errors caused like fatal things that threw exceptions that went up to top level, then you wouldn't get the evaluation cascade.
No, but that's the whole point of the confirm. That's the whole point of confirm, is that you're not. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. Is okay? So your point is, what I'm saying is, the initiation of a symbolic cascade, so to speak. If we can nip it in the bud with a confirm quiet or something, then we're done. Then we're not going to get any evaluation cascade because it's going to have been, unconfirmed, so to speak.
Yep.
And so maybe the point is that you want one set of message groups to just be the various argx and option value type of things that get issued when a function is evaluating its arguments. But of course, there are many other reasons why functions might return unevaluated.
Right, but my claim is the generic thing you want is, and now actually this point about nipping it in the bud, I think is the important point. As soon as something, if you wrap a confirm something or other around a thing to say, okay, if this returned unevaluated, it's wrong. I mean, the best thing would be that you can wrap a confirm something around a small block of code and have it be the case that if something inside there returned unevaluated and started cascading, because the disadvantage, Tom, is that unless you write confirm quiet around every single function, you can't nip it completely in the bud. The thing has already.
But that's the whole.
No.
Unfortunately, that's a flaw in the whole thing. When I write code, if there's a failure, I want it to exit immediately. I want it to core dump, because I will go and fix it. If I don't do that, then none of the code could possibly, would ever get developed.
That's a suggestion of a confirm that looks inside and infects everything. Go ahead.
Well, no. Maybe the confirm. So you're right. So none of the confirms look inside except for confirm quiet, because if a message happens anywhere inside the confirm quiet, no matter how deep it is, or no matter how dynamically scoped, etc. it is, it's going to stop. So I mean, if you did have things like messages that were, if it was detecting the messages that got thrown when things return evaluated, then
right, which is why I keep on pushing for this idea of messages that may even be off by default that just say this evaluated symbolically.
Well, maybe there's also just a way of, some way of standardizing all of those. I don't know.
Well, a common thing you could do is things that have down values that evaluate.
Right. I mean, we considered this. I mean, this is in the early days there was discussion of confirm evaluated or confirm evaluates or something like this, and basically it was sort of, there were all sorts of issues because there were things about things with value queue didn't quite work, and then also there was the idea of just checking if the expression changed, but then there's stuff where the
square root of 2, for example, doesn't evaluate, but yet it's undoubtedly a perfectly valid thing. Right. Anyway, this is, I think, a separate discussion. Let's just have a quick look at the other things on this agenda, then we need to wrap up. My question here: confirm types or type checked or something. Since we've got a whole type calculus now, why not have something where you can give it an expression and give it the type that expression's supposed to have, and it can determine whether it does have that type? How do you tell, given a type specification, whether an expression matches that type?
Well, I'm not sure that expressions have types. I mean, expressions maybe are castable to certain types, but an expression just has type expression, does it not?
Right. I mean, so certainly in the compiler, right, it says if the inputs have this type, then you can prove that these resulting expressions have certain types. It's not like an expression on its own has a type.
But you could turn an expression, you could pull out what look like free variables and give them types, turn it into a function. Right, you'd have to turn an expression into a function.
Yeah, that's not what I had in mind. I mean, the main thing I had in mind is, how do we simulate? I mean, the thing people like about typed languages is the thing you were saying earlier, Tom, which is this thing wasn't the right shape core dump.
Yeah.
Right. And so I want to know, given that we now have type annotations, if we sprinkled type annotations in code and then essentially forced our analog of a core dump when the type annotations don't match, could we do that?
You want to do that with inferencing, not post. Not after the.
No. I understand.
I'm asking. Sorry, I'm just asking.
I was saying do it post. Do it just at runtime.
During evaluation.
Right, at runtime.
So after the thing's run, you want, if it doesn't meet a type, you want it to.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Right. Well, so what you want to know then is, given an expression, is it an instance of a type?
That's what I want to know. Exactly so.
Now, a lot of these types are quite like some of our, sort of, quantifier type of syntax. So do we not have instance of, or?
Well, we might have. That's what I'm asking for here.
Yeah.
That's what
I mean, so we talked about.
But a thing like that's perfectly well defined. So.
Right, sure. But we talked about this a bit in the compiler meeting, I think, a little bit ago. And I think the question is, so first of all, is it not the case that sort of the top level equivalent of types like this should just be patterns, and then this is just confirm match? And alternatively, I mean, maybe this is a bit of what Tom is maybe saying, if we had a function that was sort of a top level function where you'd say, is this expression an instance of, or maybe castable to an instance of this type, then you could use confirm by and also get a similar result.
Right. I mean, the thing you're given is an expression. So you would be casting the expression to the type. And if that succeeds, then you're happy. And if it doesn't, you're not.
Right. But I mean, it just seems like, I don't know if anyone disagrees with this. I mean, it seems like patterns are the more standard, probably more concise, cleaner way of representing basically the same idea.
I know, but we've got a whole, right, but we've got a whole, my point is, like integer 16 or something,
Exactly.
It would be of interest to know whether the thing you have, the expression you have, can be cast to an integer 16.
I agree with you.
Perhaps. I mean, I think that's a pretty niche case, though. I mean, I think so. I think that there might be some cases where you want to know that, particularly if you're about to pass this integer to some compiled code. But then I think that it's a niche enough thing that I think it shouldn't have its own function, and instead you should just use confirm by with a sufficiently nice
well, fair enough.
curry.
Yeah, well, that
function.
might be true.
All I'm suggesting then is that the dynamic type checking of castability should be a thing, and maybe this should be in the compiler meeting. And we are running out of time here, but I did want to just mention module scope. Okay, so I've seen people trying to use module scope. What the heck? Okay, this is okay. Do people know what module scope is?
No.
Is this the general utilities thing?
It is. It's a thing that allows you to basically say lexically within this module. Let's see. Can I load it?
Well, no. So it's all it does is it looks lexically. It uses cases and it finds all the instances of set and set delayed, and then it puts them into a module. So basically, it's a module, but where you don't have to declare the variables. And
Which
it works
I think
95% of the time. Yes, I agree.
Well,
I think it's a terrible thing.
Okay, so people like Max use it all the time, and I have to rip it out of his code.
But you don't have to give any. I mean, another thing you could do is you give some markup on the symbol, like variable I, but that could appear anywhere in the.
There's another solution, which I think is a better solution. It should just be part of code assistance. As soon as you type module, right, you can just type module like this, and then as soon as I type x equals 6, it would give you a thing that says put that in the module.
Yeah, I mean the Wolf workbench has had this feature for more than a decade. So I agree. I 100%. That is something I use all the time, and because I declare, I can see, oh, is this a variable I meant to introduce, or is that a typo I need to fix? But I can tell by the coloring. So I agree. I agree 100% with an easy way to add it to the module via code assistance is good, but just auto scoping is just a recipe for subtle bugs.
Fine. Okay. All right. So can we feed this to Brenton, please?
Yeah, sure.
For code assistance. And we might even want to, I mean, I'm wondering whether the color, whether even syntax coloring, whether these could be slightly lighter blue. For example, if you explicitly type in a module, you type a variable like this.
Well, I think the more common instance, like I think
if you put the X in there, you'll get a right. It'll be colored as a local variable, right? So you can tell the difference.
Okay, fair enough. Fair point.
Right, but I think that the more common instance, and there probably isn't much helping this, but the case where I miss module variables is if I've written something outside of module and I've defined a bunch of variables globally while I was writing it, and then I copy it into module and everything is black. And so I forget to add a variable, but I don't think there's really much helping that because it's not like you're going to, highlight every single user-defined symbol in blue or something like that the minute you copy it into a module.
Right. That although again, that's something where code assistance, like you could have a look for or add all left-hand sides or something, right?
Yes, but we should deal with that encoded substance. Okay, let's just see if we can deal with this.
The conditional expression, I think we can deal with
What the heck is the difference between these?
It's the styling of the if. Maybe it's not coming through. Billy should be here, and maybe also Jeremy. But
I'm fine with this number 3.
Okay, that looks fine to me. So Billy, just give me the spec. I mean, this roots thing is probably a bigger conversation that we should. So if you really have to go,
yeah, I have to go. So
right.
we should.
I would just invite you on the very first differential root object in there. So at the top, sorry, at the start of the section, that no, right there, the y prime, the y of 12. If you just click on it, right.
What are you telling me, that it's useless?
Well, I'm telling you that I'm just telling you the why these aren't. Why why it was obvious that these shouldn't have just tooltips, because
yes, I've never thought they should have tooltips.
Right.
I don't think the tooltip is a good idea. I think this should, on hover, it should light up. You should click it. You should get a pane. The pane should have all kinds of interesting things in it.
All right. Well, we'll have more time next meeting to this. We'll start with this and also the updates to the output size limiter and things like that. So
sounds good. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, guys.